I've been getting back into game collecting recently, and my focus of late has been the old Sega consoles from the 90s, specifically the Sega CD. Now, the Sega CD is an add-on for the Genesis or Mega Drive that most people probably only know because of the AVGN episode where he just rags on the amount of FMV games that came out for it. But there's a lot of great stuff that came out for the Sega CD besides all the FMV games. Now, there were a lot of those, but there's a lot of hidden gems on the system that I think more people need to know about. Now, today, I'm not necessarily going to be looking at hidden gems, but more just like Sega CD games that caught my eye, that I really wanted to get a closer look at. So without further ado, let's take a look at some Sega CD games. Now, before we get started, I want to mention that for most of these games, I only played them for the first time a month ago, at most. So if any of you have happened to grow up with these games and have much stronger opinions for them than I do, that's fine. Differing opinions, after all. Growing up with any game can give you a bias towards it. I would know. Maybe a little less so for the Sega CD, because, I was totally born in the 90s, guys. Lastly, this is just a few of the games for the Sega CD that I played that interested me the most. Not listed in any particular order, and not a comprehensive list of every single good game ever made for the system. A good video game, like any art form really, is totally subjective. Please don't post an angry comment if this list doesn't include a game you love. Now then, with that out of the way, let's begin. Now this is an interesting one. A platformer where you play as an animal wearing a superhero suit? Maybe not the most original idea, but hey, 90s excuse plot. Wonder Dog puts you in the shoes of the titular dog as he runs past levels to, I think to defeat some alien menace or something. I don't really know. Who cares? The control here was a little off-putting. There's 3 actions Wonder Dog can do: run, jump, and throw stars as projectiles. But on the title screen, you can actually remap which button does which action, which is honestly pretty neat. I found my personal comfort zone with run on A, jump on B, and the stars on C. I really wish more platformers back in the day did this. There's a catch though. Tell me, what's the most important part of any platformer? The levels. And as much as I like the colorful aesthetics and the bouncy music, it's decent enough. The level design doesn't cut it. Take this level for instance. It's very straightforward, just extremely flat and uninteresting. Straightforward in the most boring way possible. There's just no real substance, nothing to keep you wanting to play, to see what's coming up. Like, what does this level have to offer for me? There's none of that. It's very important to note that Wonder Dog has the ability to float briefly, if you hold the jump button after jumping. When you combine this with a running start, you can get some serious air distance and skip big chunks of the levels. I can only assume that this feature was added later in development because most of the levels are clearly not designed around this ability. But the glide ability notwithstanding, there's a core problem here. You get your platforms to climb up on, you have the hills to run up and slide down, but those just feel more like shoehorned attempts at forcing levels to have more content rather than actually adding anything to the levels. Levels that have either a gimmick but go nowhere with it, or designed so poorly that it borders on, if not surpasses, frustration. There's just nothing special here, at all. Nothing that distinguishes Wonder Dog from any other generic mascot platformer. And that's a damn shame, because honestly, when I first saw this game for the first time, I was really excited to play it. It looked like it would just be some innocent, fun, cute little platforming game. And to credit its art style, that's fine, the music is fine, it looks fine, the game looks fine. It's just everything else that I'm not okay with. Oh, I thought I hit gold there, but I guess it just wasn't really meant to be. Still, I got a whole list of games here to go through for this video, so let's see what else we got. Alright, what did I put here? Alright, an RPG platformer hybrid called Popful Mail. Come to think of it, I don't own most of these games. Well, that's no problem. I can just go onto my computer, go on our trusty internet auction site eBay, just snatch up these games. They can't be more than like, I don't know, $50 or something, and we'll be in business. Well then, I'm not getting these games anytime soon. There's only one thing I can do at a time like this. As luck would have it, the Sega CD actually does not have any forms of copy protection whatsoever. So, you know what that means? Let's continue. Popful Mail is, as I mentioned before, a platformer action RPG hybrid. I gravitated towards this game immediately when I first heard of it. The game stars a young woman named, Popful Mail, an up-and-coming bounty hunter who's looking for the highest bounty around so she can collect all the money. After failing an earlier bounty, she comes across a town where a much better one is posted, that being some wizard guy whose capture would earn her 2 million gold, and thus her adventure begins. The game gets off to a promising start, with a simple first screen to get accustomed to Mail's controls. She has an HP meter at the bottom left, and a bar in the bottom right which changes to display the HP of any enemy you engage in combat with, which is actually a pretty nifty feature. But then, you start to realize something as you progress. This game is hard, like, really hard, harder than it should be. The enemies deal a lot of damage, you barely get any gold from killing certain enemies, and the worst part, there are no invulnerability frames. You know what that means? If you get sandwiched in between a bunch of enemies or hazards, you'll just take damage non-stop and you'll just die instantly. It really saddens me that they jacked up the difficulty so much internationally, because yeah, I looked it up. Apparently the Japanese version is actually a lot easier, and they just made the game really difficult internationally for no discernible reason. I couldn't find any information on that. I don't understand why people do that. I have to admit, I gave up at the first major boss of the game, the wood golem. While I got a pattern down for the first phase, it hits like a tank and my HP is always drained in 1 or 2 hits, and after an hour or so I just couldn't take it anymore. Maybe one day, but certainly not today, because good lord, that was a difficulty spike I could not handle. Still, I can't discredit Popful Mail completely. I have to compliment the audio and visuals because they're brimming with charm. Cheesy as they may be, the animated cutscenes are quite nice for a CD game of the time. They have that 90s anime art style that I'm sure most people still love to this day. And believe it or not, the voice acting honestly isn't half bad. It's nothing that will blow your mind, but most of the actors do a serviceable job, even if a few characters sound like they're reading directly off the script with no context given for how they should be sounding.
Say, I've watched you slice your way up here. Most impressive, I must admit. Who are you?
Either way, you might say I didn't give Popful Mail enough of a chance, but I just can't stand sudden difficulty spikes, and in a game that's already hard enough as is, it's really just too much for me. At the very least, Popful Mail is certainly not a bad game. It clearly had a lot of love put into it. It's just during the localization where it went wrong, but hey, what can you do? Ooh boy, Snatcher, one of Hideo Kojima's first big hits before Metal Gear Solid hit the scene, and he's still going at it today. I'm really excited to play Death Stranding, but for now, let's see what this game had to offer me. It's a visual novel that takes place in a dystopian future where robots of unknown origin named Snatchers by the populace kill humans and then copy their skin to take their place in society. Nobody knows why they do it or what their ultimate goal is. You step into the shoes of Gillian Seed, an amnesiac who takes it upon himself to help end the Snatcher menace. Gillian joins a special force of Snatcher hunters called Junkers, and after his induction, the adventure begins. The game is split into 3 acts, and for this video I played through the first act. But I'm definitely going to play through the rest of it on my own time, because this seriously captivated me. I was surprised by how invested in the story I quickly became. Obviously the Snatchers are really cool looking, if deadly, but you still want to see one. Throughout Act 1, you're kept in suspense as Gillian investigates a lead on a Snatcher that killed one of his fellow Junkers, and it reaches a satisfying conclusion at the end, with the Snatcher in question being found and destroyed by Gillian and a mysterious bounty hunter that kinda comes out of nowhere. There's also a fair amount of voice acting, really good voice acting too, but most of the dialogue is through text. You got all that? Whew. Honestly, that summary is just scratching the surface. There's a lot more that happens in between those events, and there's also a lot of flavor text and funny dialogue too. I got some laughs out of Metal Gear, Gillian's little robot sidekick, and the optional conversations you can get into. It perfectly fits with the style of gameplay. But speaking of the gameplay, it's a visual novel. For the uninitiated, this type of game usually involves mostly static screens, occasionally with some animations here or there, with the main focus being exploring the world around you with context-sensitive options. In Snatcher, usually gameplay involves investigating your surroundings, getting information from people, calling phone numbers, and looking around. Gillian and Metal Gear will usually comment on the things that you select. One thing to note is that it's pretty easy to get lost, and not being able to progress through the story. From what I can tell, it seems like the game really wants you to do things in a specific order to be able to proceed, which isn't a bad thing. With the type of character you're controlling, it almost makes sense, having to figure it out and all. But the game doesn't do much to make it easy. If you get stuck on the same screen or seem clueless for long enough, Metal will usually give you a small hint which is appreciated, but I feel that it really isn't enough to mitigate the problem. Nevertheless, I had a lot of fun with the first act. I got a solid 3.5 hours of gameplay out of it, which was pretty enjoyable. Even the part where I got stuck for a while, I didn't mind because I filled the time with all the funny flavor text while I was searching around. If you can make even getting lost entertaining, you're probably doing something right. I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised by what I played of Snatcher. I'm not really one to play visual novels, but for this video I had to at least give it a shot, especially with all the people who praise this game, and I can tell that this praise is warranted. I'm eager to see how the rest of the story plays out. Good job, Kojima. Now, for our last game.
Hey, did you forget about the best Sega CD game ever made, you know? Sonic CD? This game is the only reason people know about the Sega CD, and you just forget to mention this in your stupid list? How could you?
What the? Who are you? How? No. See, I wasn't going to mention Sonic CD because that's cheating. It's been in like every Sega CD related list ever, probably. I want to be different, okay? Sonic's it's a decent game, but like I'm trying to be more original here. It's a decent game, but it doesn't belong on my list. Everybody and their mom has played Sonic CD. Now get out of here, jeez. Anyway, the last game on the list.
Were you expecting some sort of grand, amazing, hidden gem? Nah. I like the more mundane finishers. May I introduce to you The Misadventures of Flink, a little obscure, somewhat bizarre platformer that was planned for a Genesis release but moved to the Sega CD instead. And hey, how can I complain? We get all those graphical enhancements and the CD quality audio. With all of that, what does Flink have to offer? Well, as for the story, yeah, I can barely tell. There's not much dialogue in this game. I guess from the intro, it's about some dark wizard guy arriving on the land and wreaking havoc, and Flink has to stop him or something. I don't really know. The goal of the game is to rescue 4 sages or leaders or something and recover their magic orbs so you can confront the wizard head on. As you can tell, I paid extremely close attention to this thrilling storyline. Anyway, what's the gameplay like? I hear you excitedly asking through the screen. I have bad news. This is where it starts to go downhill. The best way to describe the way Flink controls is heavy. Controlling him feels like controlling a 10-ton weight, and in a platformer that's the last thing that you want. The problem is all the precise jumps you need to make, because Flink is very bad at that. Not only does he feel incredibly heavy, but his mid-air control is very poor. It's not NES Castlevania levels of bad or anything, but it might as well be. And arguably, the worst part is that Flink has no run button. Instead, you can just move left and right, and Flink gradually speeds up as you go. This was unbearable, honestly. I missed tons of jumps because of this, which just made me want to drop the controller and play literally anything else. I have to be honest, I did not find this game very fun. It was just frustrating, and now I'm very glad I did not spend over $250 on it. I wish I could say it had potential, but no, not really. The only thing I can confidently compliment is the art style, designed by pixel artist Hank Nyborg, who would most notably work on the 2D Shantae games in the future. The visuals are pretty cartoony, but they're still pleasing to the eye. Sad to say that's the only thing I really got out of Flink, though. What a letdown. Control is everything, guys. If your game controls poorly, people won't play it, you know?
Well, that was a trip. We looked at some good games, some bad games. Honestly, none of them were like truly astonishing or amazing. Nothing that you couldn't find done better nowadays in today's landscape of games. But at least none of them were truly awful by any means. Still, I'm very glad I did not have to spend $2,000 on really old Sega games that nobody cares about anymore. At least, I'm sure people care about Snatcher. But, either way, I have these illegal, pirated, very bad burned discs, and I need to get rid of these. So, I'll see y'all later, but if you'll excuse me, I need to, do some spring cleaning.